Dean wondered if you'd like to re-record your incredible encounter, because the original files sounds really corrupted. Do you want to tell it, like start from the beginning?
No worries. Well, I'm 60 years old now, so the memory's not real flash. I can't remember exactly when it was in 1979, but I do remember it was around winter. It was there was a low mist hanging in all the gullies. I was driving from Brisbane down to Shepparton, and my GDR Tirana XU1 with big spotties on about 3 o'clock in the morning, and going through the Pilliga scrub. The spotties came in handy for the odd kangaroo here and there. But as I got closer to Coonabarabran, actually the sign said 10 kilometres from Coonabarabran. It looked like a wild pig eating a dead kangaroo on the road, and it was huge. So I imagined it would have been a razorback. Anyway, as I got closer, I noticed it was taking up pretty much the whole road. So I'd slowed down to second gear, so it's going pretty slow. And I got a pretty good look at it. And this thing stood up. It would have been about probably 8 feet high, covered in shaggy, browny coloured hair. And it just stood there looking at me. And I had my mate in my car with me, and he said, "What the hell is that?" And I said, "I don't know." He said, "Pigs can stand up on their back legs." I'd slowed down at that stage. I was in second gear, about to go into first, but I couldn't slow down enough. I was doing 90 mile an hour when I first saw it. I drove around it close enough for my mate passenger side window, which was down, to go past it and pretty much touch it as we drove past. He didn't. He freaked. We went past it, and I did a handbraking, and a semi came up behind me, and he had his spotties on, and he was slowing down, and this thing turned around and looked at us, and then it picked up the dead roo. It looked like it was eating a dead roo. I picked up a dead roo off the road and dragged it off into the bush. And I grabbed the torch out of my glove box and took off after it into the bush. I was curious as hell, so I just went in there, and I realised after about probably, I was about 20 metres into the bush, and I realised, hang on a sec, what are you doing? So I went back to the car, and the truckie and my mate were having a yak. My car was locked. The truckie said, "What did you see?" And I told him, and he said, "Oh, pop into the Ampol service station to Coonabarabran and have a look on the wall in the restaurant." So we went into Coonabarabran and pulled up at the Ampol there and filled up and had a look in the restaurant wall. And my mate was already in there, and he said, "That's the thing we just saw." There's about half a dozen people in there, and they turned around and they looked, and they said, "Where'd you see that?" And I said, "Just up the road, 10 kilometre sign it was." They said, "Oh, how long ago?" And I said, "Oh, about half an hour ago. It was eating a dead kangaroo on the road." And they said, "Oh, you need to report it." And I said, "No, we don't. We need to get out of here," because 1979, you can, I suppose even these days you consider it a bit of a weirdo if you spot one of them and tell your mates about it. Yeah, so we just jumped in the car and headed off to Shepparton, and never said anything to anyone about it until later years when Dean contacted me.
I was re-listening to your old one because I wasn't totally familiar with a razorback pig, so I looked up a picture, and they are enormous. So what you spotted, your first thought was that it was a razorback because it was so huge. Is that what made you think that?
Yeah, and they're about probably, razorbacks are about hip height, probably about, you can get them 6-7 feet long. They're huge, yeah, they're big. And you only get them around like places like Pilliga Scrub and along the Namoy River at Narrabri and that. But that's what we thought it was. And until we slowed down enough, I was in second gear at this stage trying to slow down because we were belting through the Pilliga Scrub at 90 mile an hour. You could in those days.
Probably no seatbelts on too.
No, not in the Tirana XU1. Anyway, yeah, so when it stood up, we just went, "Holy crap, what's that?" I couldn't slow down in time to pull up before it without locking it up. So I drove around it. I drove actually into the gravel on the opposite side of the road to me, drove around it, copped a bit of a whiff of it. It smelled a combination of rotting flesh and wet wool. Got close enough to have a look at its hair, and the hair was actually quite strong-looking hair and shaggy brown hair it was.
Strong as in like thick and lots of it?
Yeah, very thick hair. And we got to see its face as well. So its face was pushed in a bit like a pug, I guess you could say. Had no hair on its face. We couldn't see its eyes reflecting in the lights. And it was A real shock and a surprise.
When it stood up, how tall do you reckon it was?
Oh, I'm an ex-truck driver, so I reckon it could have looked in the windscreen at me in a semi. So what's that, about 8 foot?
Yep, that'd be about right.
Yep. Broad shoulders, no neck.
How wide do you think the shoulders were?
Would have been a good metre across the shoulders. Yeah, about a metre. Had long arms. I do remember that. Its arms, well, I guess being 8 foot tall, you would have long arms.
In proportion to the body?
In proportion to the body, they looked long. I couldn't see how long its legs were because its shaggy hair was hanging so low, hanging sort of halfway down its thighs.
You couldn't see any sexual organs either because of all that long hair?
No, I couldn't see any, no.
You're driving along and you spot this strange, whatever it is, coming up in your headlights. What made you think it was something eating? How was it moving its body?
Oh, it wasn't moving. It was on its hands and knees, and it was that's why we thought it was a pig. As a pig, it would have been as high as the bonnet on the Tirana. And it's when we got closer and backed it down. I had the spotties on full too, so got a really good look. When I'd slowed down enough to second gear, we would have been probably a good 50 metres from it, and that's when it stood up. Crazy.
It stands up. You said you did get a look at a face. Can you describe the face? You said it was a bit pushed in like a pug, but other than that...
Yeah, face was black, and it was it had a flat nose, broad nostrils. Uh-huh. I could see its eyes, but its eyes didn't reflect in the lights of the car. It had big hands, and the hands were partially covered in hair, but not a lot of hair. Hands like a gorilla.
Meaning the colour and the fur on it?
The size as well. They were large hands, very well padded, black padded.
And you could see fingers and thumb?
Oh, yeah, yep. When we went past it, I did a handbrakey, so I had the spotty shining straight on it. It looked at us, turned around and looked at us, and then it bent over and picked up the dead roo and dragged it off the road. That's how I was able to track it into the bush. I just followed all the blood and guts into the bush with my torch.
Were you able to see any expression on the face?
No expression at all.
You could see a mouth?
Yeah, I could see a mouth. The mouth was broad, big lips.
Open or closed?
No, closed it was.
It didn't move its face at all when you looked at it? I mean, I know you only got a quick look at it, but...
It spun around when we drove past it and watched us. We sat there for a second looking at it, and it looked at us, and then it bent over and picked up the roo and walked off into the bush. It wasn't hurried at all. It just took its time.
Describe that movement to me, I guess. So it's on its hands and knees, stands up.
Yeah. It gets up on its feet and stands there looking at us with its arms hanging. And when it bent over, it didn't lean on its knee or anything like I would. It just bent over, picked up the roo off the road and dragged it off. Bent
over at the waist?
Yeah.
And did it use both hands or just the one arm?
Just picked it up with one arm, one hand, yeah.
You said in your original report, picked it up like a footy.
Pretty much, yeah. You hear about all sorts of weird things going on in the Pilliga Scrub, and what we saw on the restaurant wall at the Ampol service station was drawings, photos. There was a photo of a truck, and the name on the side, the driver's side door of the truck had big scratches on it. There was drawings of it looking into the windscreen. It was interesting stuff that was written there, dates and times, and I wonder whoever got all that stuff, because that's from last time I remember that service station's closed now.
And this was back in 1979, you said?
Yeah, 79.
Lots of stories around that area, lots of encounters.
Oh,
you listened to the interview that I did with a recent, well, she actually had her experience 10 years ago, but that was at Hickeys Falls.
Yeah.
Pretty terrifying encounter. The creature she saw, she was estimating to be easily 9 foot tall. It was pretty scary.
Well, in 1990, I was driving back to Brisbane from Sydney. I was in the army back in those days, and I went through the Pilliga and I picked up the Pilliga Princess.
Did you?
Yeah, picked her up. Oh, yeah, she got in, a bit smelly. I said, where are you going? She said, Narrabri, and I was heading north, and I drove her up to where the Pilliga Scrub pretty much ends before you get to Narrabri. She said, you want some sex? And I said, not really. She told me what she'd do for me if I gave her $10. So I pulled over and I said, look, I'm really not into that. Anyway, I dropped her off. But
poor woman. Imagine having to do that to make a buck.
Yes, it is. But she reminded me of Captain Pugwash. Remember the cartoon series years ago? Little round face, big rosy cheeks, hair that stuck out underneath a terry toweling hat. The terry toweling hat was blue.
Was she a white woman, or was she an Aboriginal woman, or what?
No, I think she was white, yeah.
How old do you reckon she was then?
Oh, I reckon she would have been in her 60s back then.
Right. Do you know anything about her story?
No.
The woman I interviewed who had the Hickeys Falls sighting mentioned that she'd found out that the woman that she'd lost her husband somehow and then lost all her mental faculties and spent the rest, however long, the years after that, selling her body for cash. Yeah. Camping out, a recluse, basically. I think I read that she'd actually been killed by a truck in 1993, ran towards the truck and deliberately got herself run over. And that's how she passed away.
From what I saw, the truck would have come off second best.
Yeah, right.
She was short, I'm 6'5", so she would have been probably a bit shorter than my shoulder height, say chest height. But she was, as short as she was, there was the same dimensions sideways.
And there was nothing spooky about her?
As I said, she's quite odorous. I'll give anyone a ride when I was back in those days, in the army days, and I was really uncomfortable with her approach, I guess. Didn't want to be a part of it, so I dropped her off.
I do know there's this legend around her, and I think it's grown up that there are some stories that she's a ghost and you stop to pick someone up on the highway and then suddenly somebody's not there, or suddenly she's in the back of your car. You're the second person now I've spoken to who actually has met her or knows that she was actually a real person. There's no ghost. There's no spookiness about this particular myth anyway.
No, none at all. Physical person.
Let's go back to, you've stopped the car, got out of the car, followed this creature into the bush. What happened then?
I could hear it crashing through the bush. I had the torch pointing down towards the ground because there were traces of blood and guts from the kangaroo, and I was following that. And I got to this really big tree in there, and I noticed there was like big scratch marks on the sides of the tree, and I could hear it crashing through the bush further on. And that's when I stopped and turned around and looked back at where my car was because the spotties were still on. I thought, hang on a second, bit of a dildo on this, mate. So I turned around and shot back to the car, and the truckie had pulled up, and a mate, and he was locked in the car talking through the window to the truckie.
He wouldn't even open the window to talk to the truckie.
No, he reckons he was pretty happy he had his brown jocks on that night. And then I spoke to the truckie for a minute, and he said, yeah, those things are spotted around here quite often, and if you could pull into the Ampol service station at Coonabarabra, it's got all the information up on the wall there.
Did the truckie actually see anything?
No.
So
he saw
picked
us.
up the roo and left before he got there. You mentioned at the service station that people had said you should go and report that. Did they mean go and report that to the police? Or
No, actually, there was a lady behind the counter, and she asked us for information on it, and I just said, look, it was at the 10K sign back there towards Narrabri, and that's what we saw, blah, blah, blah. And then I looked at my mate and I said, we need to take off. This is a bit creepy. We just jumped in the car and took off.
What did you think it was? Like, what did it resemble?
A gorilla. Yeah, but they're short, so this thing was huge.
It gave you the impression that it was more an animal than a human?
Over the years, I've pondered on what I saw, and I've spoken to some people about it, and to Dean as well. Given the sightings and different things we've seen through the years, like I spotted the Min Min light when I was driving road trains out in the bush, Western Queensland, and who knows really what those things are. It could be one aspect is could be a demonic activity.
Yep.
And that was confirmed maybe by Dean when he said his eyes blinked sideways.
We've had 3 different reports of sideways blinking eyes. And we've also got another few in, just a recent one of diamond-shaped eyes too.
Oh, okay.
Very strange. The sideways blinking would be enough to freak me out, that's for sure.
I'm not afraid of much. So there's known Yowie activity around a railway tunnel in Landsborough, just west of here. Yet to go out there and have a look. Maybe next time Dean comes up here, we'll go there and have a look. These days, everyone's got a dash cam and carries a phone with a camera on it. I'm just wondering how long it's going to be before we actually get footage, actual footage.
Most people, their encounters happen so quickly and suddenly, and they're so shocked. Adrenaline pumping through their system, brain slows down. It's hard to actually whip out your phone and get a photo in the few seconds usually that most encounters take to actually get a photo. I'm thinking there's possibly more chance with a dash cam that's just on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When you're in the car with your mate in the Tirana and you see this thing up ahead, what did you say to each other?
Nothing.
So you guys didn't say anything to each other. You just saw this creature coming up in the headlights.
I just said to my mate, hey, have a look at this. What the hell's that? I said, it looks like a pig. And he goes, it's huge. It's taking up the whole width of the road. So back in those days, the width of the road would have been about 3.5 metres.
So it was actually on the road, or was it on the side of the road?
It was right in the middle of the road and more on probably my driver's side, my carriageway. We were heading down into like a small gully, and then it was at the bottom of the gully, and that's where the 10K sign was. And then it goes up the other side to the right a little bit. We slowed down, 4-gear gearbox, so I slowed down to third gear, and he said, that thing's huge, you better pull up. And I said, I'm not going to pull up near it. And I got down to second gear at that stage, and that's when it stood up.
What did your mate say then?
Nothing. I looked at him and his eyes were huge.
Done a handbrake, you actually end up having to swerve around the creature. When you're swerving and it's on your mate's side, you said it was close enough. If he'd stuck his hand out, he would have been able to touch it.
Yeah, I reckon the mirror might have touched it.
He got a good look at it.
Got a good whiff too.
And how do you feel about going out in the bush?
Love to.
Not frightened at all?
Nah. I'm only scared of blonde ex-wives.